Hello everyone, my name is Nick Hoya, and these are three of my sewing machines. There's my Singer, it is a flatbed drop feed machine. There's my Juki, it is a cylinder arm needle feed machine. And then there's my Brother, which is a standard domestic zigzag machine. These machines take three different needles. Or do they? Let's find out. So if we consult the manual for my sewing machines, we see that for my Juki, it specifies a DPX5 industrial needle. For my Singer, we have a 251-2, and it specifies a 16X257 needle. My Brother manual, it says, use only home sewing machine needles. Very helpful. So what we have here on the bench in front of us is a standard domestic needle. This is usually known as a HAX1 or a 130/705H or a 15X1 or about 3 or 4 different names. And then right here we have a DPX5 needle. This is the industrial needle that fits in my Juki. And as we can see, these needles are they're very similar, aren't they? In fact, they both have a 2mm shank. This one, the domestic needle, has a flat side on it. This one, the industrial needle, rolls smoothly on the table because there is no flat side. Between the top of the shank and the eye of the needle, these are both 33.9mm. On the other hand, the 16x257 needle, also more commonly known as the DBX1 needle, it is it gets a little more complicated. The shank is anywhere between 1.62 to 2mm in diameter. It is 33.9mm from the end of the shank to the top of the eye. And quite frankly, I could not tell you what any other difference is. So story time. The reason I'm telling you all this is because when I bought this Juki here, I looked in the manual and it said that, you must use a DPX5 needle and no other needle will do. And so, wanting to do the right thing, of course, I went online and I purchased some DPX5 needles, a whole set of them in a variety of sizes because I didn't know what size I might need. And I installed the needles, fixed up the timing on the machine to make sure that they're working correctly. And then the machine sewed great. And then when I got my Singer, I looked in the manual, of course, as I should, and I saw that it needed the DBX1 needle, or they say the, 16 by, I always forget the number, 16x257 they called it. And now I already had a stash, of course, of domestic needles, but of course you can't use domestic needles in an industrial sewing machine. And so I resigned myself to having 2 stashes of needles, one for my industrial, one for my domestic. But then now I have another one that takes a different kind of industrial needle. And so I went online and I started looking up, DBX1 needle on Amazon. Put it in my cart and I was about to buy it, and I thought to myself, how different are these needles? And so I looked up online, and the DPX1 is a little bit peculiar in that it does have multiple different shank sizes, but the upper end is 2mm, and so presumably since this machine can take a larger size needle, it'll fit the 2mm shank. The length is exactly the same. I was able to, after a lot of searching, to find a site which described the technical details of the style of the scarf, the style of the groove, the style of the eye, etc., the shape of the shank, the length of the shank, in all these different needle systems, and I could not find a difference between them. Now, this machine has a top-loading bobbin, and the hook is on the scarf of the needle is towards the bobbin, and so when the hook comes around, it comes around outside of the needle and grabs the thread. The domestic machine, it has the scarf away from the bottom. It is a top loader, and so the hook comes around outside of the needle to grab the thread. And this one is a side loader, and so the hook comes from, the bottom to grab the thread. And so I suspect that the difference would be in the slight shaping of the scarf and the eye and the whatever, that they're going to be a little bit different, but I got to thinking, how big is that difference, and can we make it work even if it's not exact? And so I tried it. The first thing I tried to do was took the DBX1 needles out of my Amazon cart and took a DPX5 needle from my Juki and shoved it in my Singer. And wouldn't you know, it worked just fine. And I thought to myself, the HAX1 needle, the domestic sewing needle, it has a flat on its shank, but it is a 2mm shank. It is, 33.9? It is 33.9 from the end of the shank to the eye of the needle. Would it work too? Let's find out. Alright, so we're at our Juki with the DPX5 needles. This is a size 16, and this is as specified in the manual. We have some Tech 70 thread here for some nice durable stitches, and 2 layers of cotton muslin. You'll have to excuse me, I'm sort of working sideways here so you can see this. So our stitch quality looks good. Got a nice balance. I got slightly off course here because, as I said, I'm kind of sewing sideways so you can see this. But everything looks good. Let's switch the needle and try the HAX1 domestic needle. Okay, we now have the HAX1 domestic needle inserted, whatever. And the scarf is in the correct direction here. And it's actually kind of convenient because the screw comes in from this side and it bears down on the flat side of the shank. So it's pretty easy to align, so I like that. So let's give this another sew and we'll see if there's any difference in the stitch quality. Looks the same to me. So, no skip stitches, no signs of any issues whatsoever, other than the fact that maybe it's a little bit uneven because I can't aim when I'm sewing sideways. So I'd say that's a success. This works fine. Alright, we're over here on my Singer, and this time we have a DPX5, which is not the correct needle for this machine. It's a size 12, and I just have standard household thread in here because I have a bunch of bobbins that were left over from the previous owner and I want to use them up. So let's give this one a try. Now I did time this machine to this needle, and so if you have a machine that takes a DPX1 and you put, or a DBX1, sorry, there's a lot of letters and numbers here. If you have a machine that takes a DBX1 needle and you put a DPX5 needle in, you may have to set the timing. I don't know. They're really, really close to each other, so they'll probably just work. Anyway, let's do a stitch with this DPX5 needle, size 12, with regular domestic thread. So as expected, it looks fine. Piece of dirt on there. As expected, it looks fine, both sides. So, probably could adjust my tension a little bit, but whatever. Let's put on the domestic needle and see if it does anything different. Alright, we now have our domestic needle installed. This is actually a size 11 HAX1 needle because I just don't happen to have a size 12 laying around. But basically the same thing. Let's give it a try. And it would really help if I didn't wrap the little thread around presser foot. That was not the needle's fault, that was me. So, no skip stitches. You know, some slight weaving because I can't aim apparently when I'm sewing. But I'd say that worked perfectly. And I'd like to emphasize here that there was no timing adjustment. I'm using the exact same thread. I didn't even change the tension. Literally this needle just dropped right in and it worked. Now I guess comes the question, you know, would I recommend that you do this? And the fact is that industrial needles aren't any more expensive or, you know, not that really difficult to come by if you have, you know, an Amazon account or you shop in like any online store. I haven't checked if they're available in local stores because I just don't shop in local stores that much. But, you know, you buy a 100-pack online and that'll last you for quite a while. And so, for the most part, you can just buy the needles for your machine. If you're in a pinch, if you have run out of needles, if you don't have the right size needle, you know, whatever it is, if you live in the middle of Alaska and you just can't get industrial sewing machine needles, then yeah, for the DPX5, for the DBX1, a HAX1 needle will work. If you have a DPX17 or DPX16, those are both the same needle, just different points. That needle is longer. That's usually found in like walking foot machines. You cannot use a household domestic needle to substitute for that because it will be too short. You'll pierce through the fabric, the hook won't actually reach the thread, and you won't sew. So in that case, you have to get the right needle for the job, or you could possibly retime your machine, although then you may have issues with the presser foot contacting the needle bar. If you lower it by, it's like about half a centimeter or something, I think is the difference. So you may not want to do that. The general recommendation here is still to use the correct needle for your machine, but there's, you know, Tex 70 on an industrial, there's whatever Tex 27 on a different industrial, a flatbed in this case, and it works fine. I guess the lesson here is ask questions, don't just accept like what's printed in your manual necessarily. Understand what the manual is trying to tell you. I would love to tell you, you know, what is the difference with this DPX5 needle in terms of like, is the scarf shape slightly different? You know, is the groove shape slightly different? I do know that in these needles, oh actually I thought there was, I think I'm incorrect now. These needles, in fact, do have the groove going up the scarf, or sorry, the groove going up the shank. I know on some of the needles I have in the DPX5, the groove stops a little shorter, I think. But, I mean, that part of the needle's not going through your material anyways, so that can't possibly be interesting. But yeah, I assume there's some technological magic in here with the way they optimize the eye shape and the tip shape and the way the groove and the scarf transitions, but I mean, it's not showing up in the stitch quality, so I don't know. So, I will link to a few resources I found down in the doobly-doo that actually describe like the technical details of these needle systems. It is extremely hard to find because every manufacturer is just like, look up the model number that says in your manual and use that needle and don't ask any more questions, right? But there are a few resources online that actually tell you this stuff. I will link to them and you can become more educated as a person because that's always valuable. So I thank you guys for watching this video and I hope to see you on the next one. And I forgot to mention, you cannot use an industrial needle in a domestic machine because it just physically won't fit. You need to have the flat carved on the shank for it to fit in there. Won't go.